You deleted the staging server? Silence. Just the soft hum of the AC and Daniel standing across from me like he hadn't just said the digital equivalent of "I set your house on fire," but thought it'd be romantic. No backup, I asked, voice like glass about to break. His shrug was a crime scene. It was glitching. Figured it'd be faster to spin up a new one. Besides, most of it was yours, right? Mine. It's in the back-end logic that mapped 10,000 real-time data points per second and predicted supply chain risks before even we knew they existed. The same system that crashed his laptop the first time he ran it and made him say, half laughing, half terrified, "Jesus, this thing thinks faster than I do." That was Tuesday. By Friday morning, he'd given himself credit for writing it. And by Monday, it was gone. Wiped. Replaced with what he called a leaner solution, which looked suspiciously like ChatGPT-generated trash wrapped in enough buzzwords to give a TED talk diabetes. I didn't scream. I didn't quit. I did what any decent engineer does when faced with sabotage. I made a copy, an encrypted clone of my original prototype, quietly zipped, stored, and exiled into a personal cloud drive named Ashes to Phoenix Zip. And then I disappeared. No goodbye, no confrontation. Just a locked badge, auto-forwarded email, and 2 weeks of radio silence while I waited. Waited to see if he'd be stupid enough to demo it again. He was. What he didn't know. The investor he was about to present to, the one who could greenlight the project, the funding, the entire company's future, had reached out to me 3 days after I left. "I hear you're the reason Iris worked," Louis Perrault had said in his velvet slick accent. "Would you be interested in rebuilding from higher ground?" That was 2 weeks ago. And now I'm standing behind the two-way glass in a marble conference room in downtown Austin, watching Daniel run his mouth to a table of men who don't know that I'm the new CTO. Not yet, but they will. Daniel's voice spilled into the room like cheap cologne, loud, cloying, trying too hard. "We've optimized the architecture since the early prototype," he said, flipping to a slide I personally built. "Much tighter now. Modularized. Real-time indexing, predictive failure analysis." He didn't even understand half the words he was using. I knew that because he once asked me, "What's the point of all this predictive crap if we already monitor logs?" But now he was saying it like he'd invented the algorithm in a lucid dream while solving world hunger. Louis sat at the far end of the table, fingers tented beneath his chin, unreadable. His eyes flicked to the slide, then to Daniel, then, briefly, toward the mirrored glass that separated them from me. He knew, of course he knew. But Daniel didn't. Not yet, he was still dancing. Click, next slide, my system map. I recognized the redacted schema. I even recognized the typo in a synchronous queue distribution, a mistake I made in an early draft and he had once laughed at. "I'm curious," said one of the investors, Anita Chowdhury, razor-sharp, glasses like scalpels. "Who authored the architecture? It's quite robust." Daniel blinked. You could see the math in his head. How much could he take credit for without sounding delusional? "It was a team effort," he said with the humble brag tone of someone who's about to name-drop himself. "But I lead the engineering direction, so I'd say the final structure reflects my vision." My jaw tightened so hard I heard it pop. Louis raised a hand. "Before we go further," he said, smooth as espresso, "I'd like to introduce someone." Daniel stopped mid-sentence. "Oh, sure." The door opened behind him. I stepped in. Silk blouse, black slacks, calm fury in my veins, every face turned. Except Daniel, he turned last. He looked at me like he was seeing a ghost or maybe a glitch in the matrix, some fragment of a deleted file he thought was gone for good. "Hi, Daniel," I said and smiled like I meant it. "Long time." He stared, then, "What are you doing here?" I looked past him. "I'm here as CTO." Blinked once, then again. "But, of what?" I placed the folder on the table. "Of this company. Louis brought me on 2 weeks ago, said he wanted to invest in the original prototype, not a knockoff." Silence. And then Louis leaned forward. "Daniel," he said, his accent slicing the air like piano wire, "perhaps you can now answer her question. Who authorized the use of this code?" Daniel's mouth opened. No words came out, just the sound of a man realizing the floor had vanished beneath him. He tried to laugh it off. One of those brittle, tight-chested chuckles people make right before they pass out or get arrested. "Oh, come on," Daniel said, glancing around the room like someone was supposed to save him. "This is a misunderstanding. She left. We used inspiration from some of the old systems, sure, but everything here's been refactored." Refactored. That was his lifeline now, a buzzword shield. I stepped closer, just enough to see the vein in his neck start to twitch. "Refactored? You took my architecture, changed 3 variable names, and rebranded it like you were slapping a new label on expired milk. Anita leaned forward slightly. Do you have proof? Daniel's voice sharpened. I didn't steal anything. Look, we were all working on it together. She wasn't even clear about ownership. I mean, it was done on company time. Louis raised an eyebrow. Which company was that exactly? Because the prototype timestamps say otherwise. Daniel froze. I watched the timeline hit him like a brick. I'd done half the work off hours during our supposed code freeze. Logged it all. Saved every commit. Even screenshots of Slack threads where he called my approach unscalable. I could practically hear the gears in his head grinding, trying to reverse engineer a defense. You didn't think I'd walk, I said quietly, because you never thought I mattered. You thought you could coast on my work, ride my code like a stolen horse straight into a 6-figure raise. Daniel's face twisted. You were just bitter. You couldn't handle critique. I almost laughed. Critique? You once called a memory leak a feature. Louis cleared his throat. Let me be clear, he said, now fully leaning in, voice like winter steel. The demo code is a legal liability, contains proprietary logic developed by my current CTO. Presenting it as your own, without attribution, license, or permission, qualifies as intellectual property theft. Daniel paled. But his voice cracked. The board, there is no board yet, Louis interrupted, because I haven't funded anything. Then he turned to me. Would you care to walk us through your version of the platform? I nodded. Stepped past Daniel, who no longer even looked like a team lead, just a man realizing he'd gambled his career and brought a toy sword to a gunfight. He didn't stop me. But as I passed, I saw it, that flicker in his eyes. Not guilt, rage, wounded, cornered ego, the kind that doesn't slink away quietly. No, Daniel wasn't done, not yet. The click of my heels on the polished floor echoed louder than it should have. I opened my laptop, connected to the room's display, and with one breath deployed my clone of the real Iris. I've dashboard, 0 latency, full pipeline. Graphs bloomed across the screen, real-time data streams, anomaly clusters, predictive alert flags populating in synchronized bursts. Not a slide deck, not a demo, the thing itself. Breathing, thinking. Built with modular elasticity, I said. 0 reliance on external schedulers. Predictive models train continuously on rolling windows, adapting to upstream volatility before it cascades. Here, watch this. I triggered a fault injection into the dummy supply chain. The red alerts flared, then rebalanced autonomously. The room leaned in. No one spoke for 12 full seconds. Then Anita, why wasn't this shown before? I didn't look at Daniel when I said it, because someone wanted applause more than accuracy. Louis folded his hands. Tell me about the underlying IP protection. Every major component is timestamped and hashed in a distributed notarization chain. Got mirrored logs, private proofs, even repository lineage going back 6 months. Meaning, I looked Daniel in the eye now. Meaning any investor, court, or tech journalist with a pulse can verify this is mine, and his so-called refactor is a plagiarized shell. Daniel's jaw locked. I could see the tantrum simmering behind his eyeballs. I was almost disappointed. I expected more of a fight. Instead, he stood. No one here would have heard of you without me, he spat. There it was. I took a chance on you. You were a nobody. Junior dev who got lucky with a prototype. You think being CTO makes you untouchable? I didn't flinch. No, Daniel, but it does mean I finally have a seat at the table. And you're not the one pulling out the chairs anymore. Then he did something unexpected. He smiled. But it wasn't the smirk of someone who thought he was winning. It was meaner than that. Sharper. I hope you're ready for what comes next, said and turned to Louis. You think she's stable? Check her NDA history. Ask her why she left her last job. Better yet, ask why legal's still watching her inbox. Louis narrowed his eyes, and my spine went cold, because I knew what Daniel was doing. He was digging, and he had found the one card I'd buried deep. One mistake. One thing I thought I could outrun. But now he was going to weaponize it. There it was. The landmine I'd prayed no one remembered. Pulse skipped just once, but that was enough. Daniel saw it, like a vulture spotting a twitch in roadkill. He leaned back in his chair, smug now, that snake oil smirk returning like mold in a damp basement. Should we talk about Halifax, he said, casually cruel, or do you want to do the honors? I didn't respond, not immediately, because the room had shifted. Anita had gone still. Louis was studying me, not like an accusation, not yet, but curious. Alert. Way a man watches a wire on the floor to see if it's live. Daniel knew what Halifax meant. He must have been digging for weeks. He didn't have the details, he couldn't, but the name alone was a crack in my armor. So I made a choice. I picked up the hammer. 3 years ago, I said evenly, eyes locked on Louis, I discovered that my then CTO was falsifying efficiency reports for a government-facing AI logistics contract. Halifax Defense Systems. I reported it internally. Daniel snorted. You mean you nuked your whole team over a logarithm discrepancy? No, I snapped, sharper than I meant to. I mean I walked into the office on a Sunday and found code being rewritten to hide causal bias in the failure rates of civilian cargo reroutes. I let that hang. Louis's brow twitched. Anita tilted her head slightly, lips parted. They were burying flaws, I continued, statistically minimizing risk while the system actively sent supply trucks through active disaster zones. One route led a convoy straight into a wildfire perimeter. People were hurt. Daniel scoffed, but quieter now. I saw the cracks begin. They told me to stand down. Offered me a raise, a promotion, director of special programs. I declined. I leaked the audit logs anonymously. I turned to Anita. The press traced it back to me. Halifax countered with an NDA breach claim. But they never filed suit. Know why? She didn't blink. Because they couldn't risk discovery. Exactly. Now the room was stone silent. I stepped forward. I've made enemies before. I'm not perfect. But if the price of protecting what I build is that men like him, I jabbed a finger at Daniel, get nervous every time I walk into a room, then fine. Let them be nervous. Daniel stood again, desperate now. She's lying. Always does this, plays the hero, twists the story. Funny, I said. You didn't seem to mind when you stole a system written by that same lying, paranoid whistleblower. Louis stood, calmly. I've heard enough. Daniel froze mid-rant. Louis turned to me. You're still willing to take the reins? I nodded once. Fully. He turned to Daniel. You'll receive a cease-and-desist within the hour. I suggest you comply. But you, Daniel sputtered, looking from face to face like someone just realized he wasn't in on the joke. You're backing her? Louis smiled faintly. No, Daniel, I'm backing the code. The difference is she is the code. Daniel's face collapsed in on itself, that slow, sinking realization, like a building discovering gravity. He didn't speak again, not yet. But as he left, I caught it, the way his eyes flicked to my laptop. Calculating. Angry and something else. He wasn't going to sue, was going to sabotage. It started that night. At 2:14 a.m., my GitHub 2 FA pinged. 3 attempts, all failed, originating from a Dallas IP. I rotated keys, wiped tokens, slept with my laptop on airplane mode. Paranoia is ugly, but I wore it like armor. I didn't even tell Louis, not yet. I needed to be sure. Next morning, my old Slack account from the Iris Dev workspace, which should have been deactivated, flared to life. One message from Daniel, nice demo. Shame what happened to the analytics node. Guess code integrity really is hard to maintain without a good lead. I checked the pipeline. Sure enough, buried inside a seemingly harmless config cleanup script was a sleeper function. Deep in the data ingestion layer, quietly corrupting prediction models with false positive injection. He hadn't just sabotaged the architecture. He'd weaponized trust. I cleaned it. I documented it. I filed the trace logs in triplicate. But I didn't rage. I didn't even reply. Instead, I got to work, and I built a trap. We pushed out a silent patch to the beta testers. Louis was skeptical, but he trusted my judgment now. This patch contained a subtle beacon, a canary module, invisible to users, but screaming if anyone duplicated our stack outside the approved containers. 3 days later, it chirped. Data ping from a university incubator in Austin. The code was being spun up, under a different name. New repo, different shell company. Registered by one, Tycho Nova LLC. I didn't even need to check. Daniel, what he didn't know, the beacon also triggered a snapshot. I now had fingerprints. IPS, download logs, everything I needed. But I wasn't going to send a lawyer, not yet. I wanted him cornered. I wanted the arrogance to keep blooming until it bloated into rot. Because Daniel didn't know something vital. Louis had already arranged the press demo. A full public beta reveal. Investors, press, academics, and I was going to invite him, officially, as a valued contributor to the project's early ideation phase. That was the bait, because when Daniel smelled a stage, he couldn't resist stepping into the spotlight. And this time, I was holding the fuse. Demo hall pulsed with curated chaos, rows of LED panels, tech journalists brushing shoulders with VCs, the air thick with espresso and ego. Behind the main screen, I stood calm, wired, smiling just enough to keep the sharks curious. And right on cue, he walked in. Daniel. Press badge around his neck, too perfect blazer over a shirt he probably borrowed from someone who still had stock options. He looked right past me, did a double take when he caught the logo on the presentation slide. Iris Systems. Trademarked, legally mine. I gave him a little nod. He blinked, hesitated, then smirked. He still thought he could spin this. That was perfect. The keynote started. Louis did the opening, flawless, charming, diplomatic. Then he handed it over to me. CTO and principal architect, he said, the brain behind the platform. Daniel shifted in his seat, could feel the heat from his narrowed stare. I began slow, just the vision, the problem set, the core pain points Iris addressed, then the new architecture, now fortified, notarized, and 100% mine. I walked the crowd through a live simulation of a supply chain anomaly and how Iris solved it in under 400 milliseconds, predicting the disruption 8 minutes ahead of a human analyst. Applause, cameras. Then I leaned in. Now, I said, something a little different. The main screen changed. Repo logs, snapshots, IP addresses, code lineage trees, no names yet, just a voiceover. A few weeks ago, an unauthorized version of our system was deployed under a shell company. This attempt included proprietary logic lifted directly from our original pipeline. The breach was recorded, traced, and verified using embedded telemetry. I paused. In short, someone stole from us. The crowd hushed. Few heads turned. Daniel froze. Rather than litigate immediately, I continued. We wanted to illustrate something deeper. Code is not just syntax, it's time, trust, and identity, and this platform is built on ours. Then finally, I flipped to the slide with the entity name. Tyco Nova LLC, and beside it, Daniel's face. Pulled from his public speaker bio. Cropped clean, unmistakable, a few gasps. A camera flash. Louis stepped forward, submitted the breach record to the relevant authorities. Our legal team will pursue full damages. In the meantime, Daniel, we'd like to publicly thank you. The room turned to him, dead silence, for reminding us exactly why people like her deserve the credit they're so often denied. I turned to look at Daniel, and for the first time, he looked small, diminished, rage twitching behind his eyes, but no exit left. The press swarmed him. Some shouted questions. He stood, shoulders stiff, and left without saying a word. But it wasn't over, because on my terminal, beneath the celebration and the cameras and the noise, a single notification appeared. Unusual login activity detected. Internal system override attempt flagged. Daniel had tried to hit back and failed, because I was 2 moves ahead, and the final one was still coming. He thought he was clever. That after the public shaming, after the cease and desist, after being digitally branded a thief in front of 50 investors and a roomful of press, he could still crawl through the back end like a roach in the walls. Trigger something, wipe logs, burn the whole thing down. But he didn't know I'd rebuilt Iris with tripwires in its bones. Every critical node was honeypotted. Every privileged route wired to collapse the moment someone touched it with unfamiliar fingers. And when he did, at 3:08 a.m., 5 days after the demo, triggered the final protocol. I named it Deadman's Mirror. The moment he accessed the old admin console, a silent process activated, not to block, not to warn, but to watch. It mapped his every keystroke, screen captured the IP handshake, and most deliciously, synced with the AWS admin panel of his own startup, where he'd stupidly reused the same environment keys. Daniel had tried to pull Iris apart from inside, and in doing so, exposed his entire infrastructure. Louis and I didn't go to court. We went to Tech Unveiled. Monday morning, their front page ran with the headline, "Fired engineer tries to hack rival startup, gets his own codebase seized instead." Underneath, screenshots, logs, a timeline of his digital intrusion, paired beautifully with the audit trail of stolen architecture from his LLC's backend. The smoking gun hard-coded a comment into one of the modules labeled, "Fix later, stolen from Iris." I couldn't have written it better myself. Investors ghosted him overnight. His LinkedIn went dark. The Tyco Nova website redirected to a 403. Someone from his old alumni board reached out, quietly, to ask if I'd be willing to speak at their ethics panel. I declined. I was done performing for the room. Daniel had taken everything he thought he could salvage, my code, my name, my future, and tried to mold it into his comeback tour. But I took it back. Not with drama, not with vengeance, just with proof, and now, I still sit at the head of the table. But I don't pull out chairs anymore. I decide who deserves one. You're the real stars of the corporate jungle. Thanks for watching. Hit subscribe, or I'll flick the switch on your old cubicle memories.